Welcome to the OEMs, Blockers and Breakthroughs podcast, brought to you by Partful. I am your host, Tanya Tran, Partful Head of Marketing. With me is my co-host, Sam Burgess, CEO of Partful. We're here to share real stories from real companies and real people to help OEMs overcome challenges and be amongst those most forward-thinking teams. So in this episode, we have Parris joining us. Parris is Partful's Head of Customer Success, and she works with aftersales data daily to help our OEMs clients improve their productivity and efficiency. So if anyone knows about the state of data in this industry, it's her. So Parris, can you give our listeners a bit of context about yourself, who you are, your experience working with OEMs at Partful?
That was quite an introduction. I don't know whether I'm quite the expert you make out, Tanya, but thank you for that.
You are an expert to me.
Yeah. I have been in client services now for just over 10 years. I'm joining Partful just over a year ago now. I don't profess to be an expert in engineering by any account, nor in the manufacturing industry itself, but I'm probably in the unique position here where I've been able to see multiple different markets and multiple different ways of managing their CAD and their SBOMs and their technical specification documents to be able to comment on what we see as a little bit of a disconnect between how we operate or how the manufacturers manage and maintain their records in different environments.
Yeah, I think you're right there because, we were in a unique position, especially yourself, because you deal with the after-sales team at OEMs, multiple, different OEMs, and each of them has their own unique, characteristics and how they operate and things like that. And I talked to Parris earlier as well about why we see ourselves as, I would like to say, subject matter experts, is because we have the outsider perspective looking into their organizations and understand how they work, rather than, I say, for me, I work for a tech startup. I understand my organization. It doesn't mean I understand the whole tech scene. Mm-hmm. So having someone, with an outsider perspective looking into my organization and my peers and giving me that insight, it would be really valuable for me. So hopefully today, Sam and I and Parris will be able to kind of give you a bit of a therapy session on the struggles that you go through on a day-to-day basis dealing with data, just to kind of establish some foundation understanding. What other types of data are used in majority of OEMs after sales you've worked with, Parris?
So from a Partful perspective, in terms of how we approach and onboard one of our clients for a 3D interactive parts catalogue, we will certainly ask for the main points of data being the CAD, either native CAD or a step file, and we ask for the SBOM. Now, typically there will be supplementary documentation that we need to enrich that data, but that doesn't mean to say that we couldn't onboard with just those two documents, providing that they translate and they almost communicate with each other. And this was probably where the challenges lie. So I won't dig in deeper there just now, but typically you will find that these two documents are owned and operated by two completely separate departments within an OEM manufacturing business. The CAD software is typically owned by the engineer, authoring that model and making sure that it's illustrated as built. And then you have the SBOM, which should hopefully incorporate the part name, part description, and pricing that you'd want to illustrate to an end user purchasing those parts in the after sales market. So typically those will be your after sales department and operating services.
That's great. There's CAD and BOMs. You've mentioned that they're managed by two different departments. What are your experiences, Sam, in terms of you've dealt with CADs and especially BOMs as your experience working in the industry for so long? Is that the case back then and nothing's changed? How do you view that? Why are they managed by the two different departments? There's no sync up there.
So that's absolutely been the status quo through all my experience. As the aftermarket, the after sales ecosystem for organizations often reflect the fragmented internal systems that they have within their own organization, and that that's happened pretty much everywhere that I've been, even with some of the best intentions. So you will get engineers who are under a huge amount of pressure to build and design and get things into production, so the wheels of production can keep moving. And they get so target focused on that the after sales is often as we've said many times, the after sales is, we'll work that out at the point that we start producing pieces of equipment and start delivering it. But unfortunately, because they're not thinking about it from the outset, that it never actually ever does catch up. I think what's happening now, though, is that with the onset of technology, the OEMs have the ability now to really think about support a lot earlier, because they're able to support their own assets far better. So whereas before it was like, oh, we'll create a PDF, once we start going into production. Now with the onset of technologies and 3D immersive technologies like we provide, it gives organizations far greater ability to support their assets, and they can really start to dive deeper earlier on into delivering or designing and delivering for supportability. And that's the thing that still hasn't really happened yet. And hopefully this thing that we're helping to change is that designing and delivering for supportability to access that huge revenue opportunity that up to 50% of your revenue can come from if you get your support plans correct.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the design for supportability term many times now in the last 2 episodes. So
Yeah.
if anyone's interested in understanding what that means, refer back to our last episode, which we talked about quite a lot. I want to kind of like dive a bit deeper into the types of data, and like what is the process like in terms of when, say the engineers design the CADs, and then the products are out there in the market. When it comes to after sales team, how the CADs get handed over to the after sales team? What are the touch points there, and what are the issues that you see that might lead to some of the struggles that the teams are facing?
I think again it goes back to certainly the experience that I've got. There's always been a pull and a push between the engineering department and the after sales department. This may be just in the organisations that I've been in, but the engineers designing the products don't often get the opportunity to fully understand what it takes to support that product. And that's been for sure, that's definitely getting better and better because things are getting more and more reliable. But actually, understanding how that asset's been utilised and how it's been deployed and used on the ground is something that a lot of engineers just don't get the time or the opportunity to really fully experience, and therefore they don't appreciate the challenge that the after sales team have. And with the after sales team, they're the guys who pick up the phone and speak to the customers when a customer's upset or angry because something's broken. Again, the engineering department, we often get involved in that type of communication. So it's just not on their radar, and which is fair enough because they've got enough problems and challenges and pressures elsewhere. And I think because it's not at the front and center of their mindset, it often gets forgotten or neglected. And then you end up with this void internally within an organization where the engineering department are working without engaging the after sales department. Technology and PLM systems and ERP systems have helped that. So you're now getting this automated flow of information internally within organizations. That's definitely happening. That's then helping to produce these technical publications and technical manuals. But still, there's still this big sort of rift between the two sections of the business from my experience.
Parris, what do you think? What's your perspective working with the OEMs on the daily?
I'd agree with Sam there. I think the engineers themselves are approaching these files from a design and performance perspective, whereas the after sales teams are definitely looking at it more from a maintainability and a support function. So what you get there is kind of two different documentations that need to be stitched together. Where I've come from in kind of loyalty agency outside of the manufacturing industry, I found it's been super important that every role gets a chance to see what other departments do and how they operate. And that just gives them that sense of kind of translation there where they say, okay, this is how they operate. This is what they need. This is what we need. How do we stitch those two departments together for an output that is kind of seamless without having to maintain multiple records at the same time? With the CRMs and PLMs that are coming into play now, it's happening slowly, but obviously there's a challenge there in terms of the backdated history of how they've operated previously. Now, there's a lot of information there that will need to be kind of translated. And CAD softwares that are actually building these design functions often have multiple parts that an after-sales manager won't even need. So if we take a bicycle, for example, the CAD engineer will have 3 different parts for a bike frame. When they pass that over to the operating managers or the after-sales teams, what you'll find is that they don't sell those 3 parts individually. They sell them as a unit. So they would merge them all together and then sell them as the frame itself. Now, there you have a discrepancy of 3 parts versus 1 part. And in the after-sales team, they really need to understand where those 3 parts have come from and how they translate that into the 1 part that's required for a customer's perspective, and how they identify that part and are able to purchase it. Now, what Partful are doing here is merging those at the kind of source of truth. So maintaining that CAD file, speaking to the engineers, finding that translation, and working then with the after-sales team to say, okay, how do you sell this? How do you want it visually to be represented? So actually the parts identification process becomes much, much more seamless. And I think that's kind of where we're in the midst of translating what manufacturers have previously done versus where the future lies.
I think as well, to add to that, there's such a wide ranging in resources, capabilities, finances that we see within organizations. We've not seen the same example in 2 organizations. It's everyone is different. Everyone has got their own problems and their own challenges and their own limitations. And so it's a combination. What we see is everything that Parris said there so eloquently. We see a combination of that in various different sizes that result in that particular organization struggling for reasons A, B, and C. And I think where this is one of the challenges that we're looking to counter with the automation piece is that giving everyone that level playing field. So everyone, regardless of the state of your data and your own internal processes, giving organizations a funnel that they can drop their data in, that we can then capture and then produce this unique digital thread that's specific to that asset on the other side. So that's been really important. And a key part of our development is creating that funnel that we can ingest all these wide-ranging challenges that organizations face in order that we can maintain that digital thread to the end user.
That's interesting. I think sometimes the product or the machine or the piece of equipment encompasses hundreds of parts, but not all the parts are sold for maintenance or supportability, right? So what I've heard from Parris and her team many times is that a lot of the products, they would have sellable parts and non-sellable parts. So some of the parts you just don't concern with selling or the replacements for them. You just throw them away when they broke. Right? So when the engineers design the CAD, do they concern themselves with that information, or is it just like the information that's responsible by the after sales team?
So, I mean, this goes right to the heart of the strategy of creating SBOMs. There's if you're going to market with a new product, there needs to be somewhere within an organization a decision that needs to be made as to what do you want to sell as a spare part. We use the wing mirror example all the time. So if someone was to crack your glass in your wing mirror and you went back to your BMW, they might, as opposed to selling you the glass, they might sell you the entire wing mirror assembly, and that contains the glass, the plastic case, the glue that holds the glass into the plastic case, the wiring loom, the indicator light, the heating pack. So for a piece of glass that may cost $20 to replace, it actually costs you $1,500 to replace the entire unit. And that's because someone back in BMW said, well, I don't want to sell our customers this single piece of glass because they're going to then have to bond that glass and glue that glass to the wing mirror case, and that's going to end in disaster. So a strategic decision was made in order that they could sell the wing mirrors as a complete assembly. That then informs a production line. So when they're in production, they know they need to produce 10% more wing mirrors through the production run because they need to keep that in stock to allow for the spares consumption as people sort of buy things. And that's a strategic thing. They know that wing mirror glass gets cracked all the time because it's just one of those things. So then they plan for it, and then they get themselves ready for it. And again, we're just not seeing enough of that. And that again is down to the fact that the technology hasn't been good enough really to the organizations have been able to really see the benefit of doing that SBOM, unless you're an Audi or a BMW or someone like that who've got that infrastructure in place that can really benefit from a well thought out strategic SBOM creation. We had a really good example about this with one of our customers, and they were losing out on consumables, and because they'd not thought about it in the SBOM. So because they're now able to then communicate directly with their customer base, it was the MD of this particular organization. He identified, he said, well, why are we not selling nuts and bolts? People are losing these all the time. So then they created a consumable pack of spare nuts and bolts that they sell for now. I don't know whatever the price is, but they're now capitalizing on that otherwise missed revenue that people were then just going to B&Q or buying online. And it's about ensuring that the customers are using the right parts for your asset in order to ensure the maintainability and reliability of the product, and also ensuring you as the OEM capitalize on the revenue that you should be generating from your own products within that existing ecosystem. And it's something that gets missed all the time, and it's such a huge reward if you get it right.
That's interesting, because when you said SBOM, I would imagine is it service bill of materials, which tend to be the main document that the after sales team use for selling parts, right? Yeah. And the CADs tend to be the documentation that is produced by the engineering department, which tends to be used for manufacturing purposes. So I could see like the disconnect there. I would imagine the CADs are produced for the purpose of manufacturing, so it would be different to, say, the CADs needed for maintenance or selling assemblies, as you mentioned. So, in the case of helping the after sales team do their job in a more efficient way and productive way, they would need a proper CAD file for them to be able to sell the parts correctly for like part identification, things like that. Is the engineering department tend to be responsible to help them with that as well, or what do you tend to see there?
So there's some interesting points that you've raised there, Tanya. So it's not just around the CAD file; it's around the bill of materials. So you've got multiple types of bills of materials. You've got M bombs, E bombs, P bombs. There's the whole range of bombs out there, bills of materials, that is. And effectively what happens is you'll have like a manufacturing bill of materials, using the wing mirror as an example. In the manufacturing bill of materials, you will have those individual components, the case, the glass, the wiring loom, the indicator, all those will be listed in the M bomb. And then when it then goes over to the S bomb, someone within that process will create a kit number. And the kit number, let's call that kit 1234. The kit number 1234 for the wing mirror complete will consist of those 5 individual separate line items. And that's the process. So then the CAD file, effectively, that CAD file of those 5 items gets merged into one top level assembly or kit. And that's what effectively the consumers, whether it be dealers, distributors, or end users, that's what they see when they go to order the parts. So they shouldn't even really get to see the wiring loom, or given the opportunity to order the wiring loom. They should just see the kit number for the complete wing mirror assembly and then just order that straight off the back. And again, this is where a lot of problems happen, is that consumers are trying to fix and manage their own assets. They don't have the information. So they're now trying to then find, bits of glass that they can find online, or, I've done this myself. When I can't find the original equipment that I should be using, I then just go and find it on eBay or on, some other sort of website to try and fix whatever it is that I've broken.
That's interesting when you said that the consumer should be, or the dealers should just be able to see the assemblies or the kits on the CAD file, whether it be a PDF file or 2D drawings. They should just be able to see the assemblies. Is that the case that you see often? Like, is that the best practice that you see often, Parris, with a lot of the customers or OEMs you work with? And what are the struggles that they go through? Like, what the struggles you go through as well, as our team, tend to onboard them with their data?
Well, I don't think there's a standardized approach to documentation that details exactly what should be sold versus what is built. And a lot of that comes down to Sam's example of the wing mirror, them building out parts that they need to be manufactured and pulled together in the assembly line to make a wing mirror. Now, what I've seen as another example of that is the assembly line then pulls together all of those individual parts from the CAD drawings and welds it all together. So actually, the one part that might be in the middle of that assembly, you can't actually take out in isolation anyway. So then that becomes one unique part that the engineer and the CAD drawings don't really need to reflect. So then there's this kind of gap in the documentation that says this is now one whole part. This is not several parts merged into one. It's one whole part, and therefore this is the lowest sellable unit that the dealer or the customer should be interested in being able to identify and then jot down what that assembly number is to be able to purchase it. So the SBOM then gives you a detailed list of everything that can be sold and the parts and the numbers, but there's a unique number there for that assembly because the CAD drawing won't reflect that. So this is where we need that kind of that terminology or maybe a kind of another document that stitches together what those merged parts need to look like. Now, my question is probably more around the variety of bill of materials that are out there and why it's required that a manufacturing bill of material, for example, might need completely different terminology and different naming conventions than a sales or a service bill of materials. Why there isn't one kind of a universal language that the manufacturing industry as a whole speak so that you can say, yes, this part number is X, Y, and Z. In the sales bill of material, it's also X, Y, and Z, but then it's only sold in column B as ZYX, for example. And that way, there's kind of a universal language that everyone speaks that, if you spoke to the manufacturing side of the business or the engineering side of the business and you referenced a part number, that everyone was on the same page in terms of what that part number references and what it actually means and how it translates to a part or an assembly or a kit that needs to go out to a customer.
I mean, this is a rabbit hole. I've seen many bun fights over naming conventions, like full on, almost brawls over what things should be called. And shovels was always a good one when I used to work in the vehicle industry, and we used to put shovels. Was it a shovel or a spade? It was hilarious. But I think this is part of the, again, going back to the engineers, that they're so focused on what they're doing. They don't really care. It's not on their radar to make things more understandable to an end user, who might be operating their truck out in, the deserts of Oman, for example. It's just not within their scope of understanding, and therefore, there are quite, it's a practical. We'll name this a, like you said, an A, B, and C, and then the after sales guys are going, no one's going to understand what that is. I'm going to change that because I want to support my customer really well. I'm going to call this a shovel, and then and therein that's when the problem starts really. So, but yeah, you're totally right, Parris. There's no uniformed, even within it's not an engineering industry problem. Even within on the granular micro level in organisations, there's so much disparity with what to call things. And again, I keep going back to this. I think it's because organisations have never had the opportunity to really had the technology that's meant that they would benefit from sorting out this data in such a way before, because it was just all PDFs. They were like, whatever, who cares? We'll just get something out the door and hopefully someone will buy some spare parts from us. But now with this, with the digital thread that we can now put in the hands of the consumers, that actually is now really important. What you call that is really important because we're creating a little marketplace for people. We want to encourage consumers, customers, dealers, whoever that is, to buy more products and parts from the OEM. So actually, you're creating a little marketplace. So what you call that is going to be really now important, whereas before it probably wasn't quite so vital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I agree with that. I mean, if I was an engineer and my goal is my KPI or whatever OKR is to design a piece of equipment or an assembly so that the factory and the assembly line can work on it, and I don't need to concern myself with what I call individual parts or components, then I wouldn't care about naming it so that people like dummies can understand them, right? And then when it comes to the after sales team, is their job to concern themselves with the name so that it makes it customer friendly. In that case, would it make sense to just provide after sales with some control over their technology, the tools, the things that they can use to keep everything a single source of truth for the after sales, while integrated and connected with the engineering team, rather than try and make everything universal within the organization when if that universal language doesn't serve the purpose of different departments. It's just kind of like my question coming from like an outsider perspective, hearing what you both just said. I think there might be some solution to what the fragmented or like the kind of the scattered naming conventions that are going on here and making the team struggle with managing the data.
For me, it goes back to how you manage the SBOM and how you create it and manage it. Because don't forget, going back to the point, not to labour it, you haven't got just one engineer designing this thing. You might have hundreds of engineers, and all of them hundreds of engineers all have various different degrees of backgrounds and life experiences, and they're all going to call things different things. One might call it a panel, one might call it something else. So you've got that in the mix as well. But ultimately, it's about maintaining the digital thread. And make sure that all the part numbers stitch together through. I'm trying with my hands to draw the diagram that I know we should be looking at right now. But it's maintaining the digital thread, having that overall authority that controls the SBOM, so that the manufacturing BOM feeds into the SBOM, so that when that's then sent out and somebody identifies a part they order, that part number or kit number then comes back into the organization. Then is directly then correlated to whether it's a kit or a specific part that's a known entity within that organization, and then they can then send out that part to replace it. And that's the digital thread. It's two ways. It goes out and then back. But it all comes from that central control of the SBOM. Someone needs to own and take authority on that. Whether they put a strategy behind it or not, they need to own the SBOM, because that's really what you want. If you want to sell parts, you need an SBOM.
Yeah.
From my experience, I've seen that there's been some really, really good SBOMs out there. To be fair to the after sales departments, they've been brilliant. But what they haven't done is connect with the terminology or the part naming conventions of the CAD. So actually, both teams are doing an amazing job with kind of designing the components and selling the components. But actually, like Sam said, there's a digital thread here that needs to kind of correlate throughout the different terminologies that the business uses. And that probably needs to go as far as universal. Now, what Partful does is sits right slap bang in the middle of all of those departments. We've got the work instructions that enable the assembly line to pull together the CAD and merge it all together into the model that you see out on the roads or the fields. You've got then the disassembly work instructions. So the dealers that are actually kind of pulling apart that model then and being able to identify which parts come apart and which parts don't after the manufacturing process. And then you've got the customers that are actually looking to purchase the individual parts to make sure that they know which part is broken, be able to easily identify that part and purchase it through Partful's platform solution. So I would argue that we are kind of that central source of truth for these manufacturers that actually translates what you might see in the CAD file versus what you'll see in the MBOM, SBOM, PBOM, and kind of pulls that all together in kind of a way that they can then manage moving forward seamlessly without having to maintain multiple records at the same time. Because what our solution does then is allow them to update the CAD file with the engineering team. That CAD file will then push through to the PLM. That PLM will then push through to Partful, the CRM software that the after-sales team are using to manage part names, number, pricing, conventions. They're then automatically updated from the PLM, sent through to Partful. So everything then kind of speaks to one another. And that's ultimately where we want to get to. We want to get to the place where everything is stitched together in a kind of a circular fashion, so that, from design to manufacturing to servicing, right back to design change management, they all communicate with each other and in that kind of seamless fashion.
Yeah, I think that's probably the dream world for OEMs, and not just the OEMs, for Partful as well, right? I mean, I've witnessed Parris and your team struggle on a day-to-day basis working with clients, trying to help them clean their data, match the different types of documents for them. And the fact that, legacy and outdated systems and like the technology that they use, like Excel or PDF, it's just static and stagnant. And the fact that they can't really automate their workflows and they can't really update in real time and really make them struggle over the years, and multiple records of, bombs and CADs and things like that. If they want to like move into a modern era where there's technologies and real-time updates and integrations, it's going to take them quite a lot of effort and resources and time to be able to move into that era, right? And
I would say the sooner that you can stitch those worlds together, the better. We've had startup companies that have joined us that have been such a seamless onboarding because they've started from scratch. They know exactly how to stitch together the CAD with the SBOM because we've supported that kind of merging of departments, and therefore we've got them live with something that then we can maintain as new models are brought out and as design changes happen within their market, that we can kind of maintain those on a consistent and real-time time frame. Yeah. Now, the more challenging ones are the ones that have kind of historic catalogue of models that maybe we need to kind of update and bring into kind of the here and now so that we can maintain them for future. So those kind of projects can take a little bit of time, but it's absolutely invaluable to do it now because it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, 100%. The future is now, right? 3D is the future and the future is now. Brilliant. So I think I've learned a lot from you both today. One last question. I want our listeners to have something to take away. If there's one thing that you could say to our listeners, like from after sales, OEMs, engineering department, about data today, what is the one thing that you would want them to take away from this episode?
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's invested in that SBOM. If you invest properly in the SBOM, the rewards will be lucrative. The opportunities to sell and advertise and take the components that you want to sell to your consumers will be there and available. So if you invest the time in getting your SBOM sorted, you will ultimately generate more revenue for the business that you work for.
Great. Parris?
I would probably encourage the after-sales market to just take a look at the CAD. I think it would be absolutely invaluable for them to kind of understand how the engineers actually approach a design, and therefore what the after-sales team might need to consider within that SBOM that Sam's just referenced to be able to kind of incorporate how to better support their customers for user experience and serviceability perspectives.
Brilliant. So 2 things I take away from Parris and Sam today. One is the SBOM, get that right. Second is the CAD, get that right, and not just for engineering and manufacturing, for after sales as well. And I think I'm going to make the bridge, stitch them together. And that's my takeaway from today's episode. So thank you for listening. We hope our conversation was interesting to you all. Bit of a therapy, bit of a rant. We're going to rant about data, in more episodes to come as well, with more interesting guests. So follow Parris on LinkedIn.
More interesting guests than Parris, is that right? Is that
no, not possible, surely.
More in terms of the number, more interesting. No one's more interesting than Parris.
Good recovery.
I'll take
that. Follow Parris on LinkedIn for snippets and stories on OEMs after sales data management. We also have free resources on data management for after sales on partful.io/blog. Our recent article on removing blockers to revenue, how to improve your data management, is also on there, so go check it out. I've added all of that in the show notes as well, so that you don't have to worry about remembering it all. Thanks again, and subscribe today on your podcast app. So we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Podcasts, so go on and check it out. Subscribe to Partful's OEMs, Blockers and Breakthroughs to get notified when our next episode comes out. So until then, let's try and tackle our data in a better way. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.